All right, let's get right into it. Today, in this explainer, we are unpacking a massive and honestly kind of mind-bending financial puzzle coming out of the National Science Foundation, or NSF. So, after 18 long months of delays and uncertainty under the current administration, the NSF finally dropped a highly anticipated announcement. They're opening up competition for $1.5 billion in funding. Now, on paper, $1.5 billion for scientific research sounds like an absolute home run. But as we're going to see when we actually look at the data, the expectation here doesn't really match the reality for a lot of folks in the scientific community. We're going to break down exactly what this all means for the future of American basic research.
Here is our roadmap for making sense of this today. First, the $1.5 billion announcement itself. Then, we'll crunch the core numbers, figure out what's going on with the missing directorates, and finally, we'll look at the shifting priorities and oversight.
Okay, part 1, the $1.5 billion announcement. So for the past 18 months, scientists have basically been holding their breath to see how the NSF would parcel out its funds through notices of funding opportunity, what they call NOFOs. The messaging in their August 17th press release proudly framed these 12 new NOFOs as clear evidence the agency remains committed to funding basic research. That's the administration's stated goal here, right? They want to reassure the scientific community that the foundational science the NSF has championed for 76 years is absolutely still a priority. But, here's where we hit a massive snag. That celebrated $1.5 billion, it's really just a slice of the NSF's total budget for academic research and training, which actually sits at a whopping $8.8 billion. So if you're a scientist or an agency staffer, you're crunching the numbers and asking the obvious question. If these 12 NOFOs are supposed to represent the agency's primary commitment to basic research, what on earth is happening to the rest of that $8.8 billion pie?
And that brings us to the core tension happening right now. On one side, the administration has some very specific goals. They want more efficiency, they want to match the speed of awards to the research, and they want to surface unconventional proposals. But on the flip side, the scientific community is pretty stressed out. They're worried this signals drastically shrinking core budgets, a political prioritization of certain tech, and a subtle way to bypass those traditional consensus-driven review panels that have basically governed science funding for decades.
Which leads us to part 2, crunching the core numbers. Let's actually look at the data, starting with the Geosciences Directorate. In 2023, the NSF spent $918 million on core research, things like Earth, oceans, atmospheric sciences. But get this, the new estimate for 2027, based on future appropriations, is just $110 million. As one program manager pointed out, this single funding opportunity basically replaces all previous core funding for this entire directorate. That means the agency is planning to spend less than 20% of its current appropriation on basic research in this field. That is a massive drop.
And the trend doesn't stop there. Take the Directorate for Mathematical and Physical Sciences, or MPS. They issued 5 new solicitations covering astronomy, chemistry, materials science, math, and physics. But even if you combine all 5 of those together, funding is projected to plummet from $1.55 billion in 2023 to just $730 million next year, literally getting cut in half.
We're seeing this exact same story play out across biology and engineering too. Biology's core research, the foundations of life and living systems, goes from $640 million down to an estimated $280 million. Engineering? That drops from $740 million to $445 million. Now, an NSF spokesperson did say more funding opportunities will be posted later on, but a lot of scientists are definitely worried that these might just be the only solicitations for these historical core disciplines moving forward.
All right, part 3, the missing directorates.
So, the NSF traditionally has 8 directorates, but these 12 new solicitations, they only cover 5 of them. Naturally, everybody is asking the exact same question. Where are the other directorates? Why were they totally left out of this huge, highly publicized $1.5 billion funding announcement?
Let's look at the facts regarding the first missing piece, the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, or SBE. While an NSF spokesperson mentioned that some previously active calls for proposals are still out there, the structural data tells a pretty different story. The administration's 2027 budget request actually calls for the complete elimination of the SBE directorate. And on top of that, sources are reporting that a proposed funding notice for SBE has just totally stalled out in the clearance process.
Then there's the STEM Education Directorate, or EDU. It's on incredibly shaky ground right now due to some major recent policy shifts. Last year, the administration abolished the Division of Equity for Excellence in STEM, which terminated hundreds of grants in a broad anti-DEI push. Plus, just last week, the Department of Justice actually ruled that 3 long-running EDU programs aimed at broadening science participation were unconstitutional and had to end immediately. So these legal and structural shakeups definitely explain why EDU is completely missing from this new funding push.
Moving on to Part 4, Shifting Priorities and Oversight.
To really make sense of all these delays and moving parts, we've got to peek behind the bureaucratic curtain. Historically, the NSF had a ton of freedom to choose what it wanted to fund. Not anymore. Now the process looks like this. First, the NSF drafts the funding notice. But before it goes anywhere, Step 2 requires a review by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Step 3 means the Office of Management and Budget has to approve it. And only then, at Step 4, does it actually reach the public. This intense, multi-layered vetting process is exactly why NOFOs took months and months to finally win clearance.
So why add all this new red tape?
Well, acting NSF Director Brian Stone was pretty direct about it. He stated the goal is to use different funding mechanisms to, quote, surface unconventional proposals that may not advance through traditional consensus-driven review panels. Now, a lot of folks in the scientific community interpret that as a direct way for the White House to impose its own tech priorities onto the agency's budget, completely bypassing those traditional review panels. And what exactly are those new priorities? Just follow the money. The administration is heavily championing artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and massive research consortia paired up with private industry. In fact, a relatively new branch, the TIP Directorate, is promising a $1.5 billion investment in a network of X labs. So the money isn't just vanishing, it's being aggressively reallocated away from core foundational sciences and poured straight into these high-tech, industry-focused areas.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to chew on. What does this billion-dollar pivot mean for the next 76 years of American basic research? The NSF was literally built to fund foundational science, that slow, steady, consensus-driven work that actually builds human knowledge over time. As money drains from earth sciences and biology and floods into AI and quantum tech through these top-down directives, the very nature of how American science operates is fundamentally changing. All right, I hope this explainer helped you cut through the noise and grasp the real numbers here. Keep questioning the data, and we'll catch you on the next one.